So yeah, kind of get going, we were talking a lot, Nate's talking about, the opportunity available in security. See one of my brethren back here on the back row. Hats off to you, sir. Physical security is an aspect that we talk about within cybersecurity, believe it or not. There are a number of openings available to you. If you have a predilection for doing that type of work, it's a good time. Firewalls, policy, being able to bring forward, if you will, a security posture for an organization. I got my start, probably a long time ago, but I really focused it here at Microsoft in what was the TMG group many moons ago. And so before that, it was called ISO server. And I went off and did a web application proxy called UAG. They have two curse words that actually is the misnomer for it, but we won't say those in public. That product really kind of focused me in on customers coming forward with security policy. How do you make this evident in our control space? And so, that kind of set me off on that. So, I would urge you, if you have the interest, it's probably not a bad thing to look into it. So I'll go to my next slide. Advance. Give me a second. So Nate did a great job of introducing me. I am a CISSP. I came back from our recent meeting down in Tampa, Florida, putting together ISC Squared's material. So I do the exam development. When you take the CISSP exam and you walk out after a few hours, and you say, I don't know who wrote that, but I'd like to kill him, just give me a running start towards the top. So, we're not trying to make it too hard so that you can't get through. What we want to do is make sure that you have 5 years of security experience that you can pull from and be able to work through those questions. And so that's an aspect of the CISSP exam that we really look for. I have a Security Plus, a CIPP, which is the Information Privacy Professional. I got that several years ago before GDPR came to light, and that led me to my current role at IBM. I'm the Global Corporate GDPR Solutions Architect. We go to far-flung places that require passports and speak to people who don't talk English very well. They probably think I don't talk their language very well as well because I butcher it quite well. I try to continue to apologize while I'm there. But in my regular role, I'm the Senior Managing Consultant for Cybersecurity, Infrastructure, and Endpoint Security. I focus on Microsoft technologies. Guess who would figure that out? And as David said, I am the president for the York County Beekeeping Association. So if this slide actually advances, here's my ugly face, the old guy in there, I don't really recognize. And yes, we like bees. They don't have many computers tied to them, and therefore it gives us a way to put that life over here, have this life over there, and enjoy some of the Lord's wonder. Anybody here a beekeeper? No beekeeper?
Yeah. I was just thinking that it must be something about IT people because he's also a developer. Can't tell two people that are developers that do beekeeping.
Al Wint in Fort Mill runs the Fort Mill Bee Club. So I'm not here to talk about that, but if you're interested in that kind of thing, see me afterwards. I can help you out getting involved in that. So we'll start about in the beginning, right? Every device that we have that has a processor has some type of firmware in it. And it's the foundation of computing. Whether it's your phone, who's still got a Windows phone. I know I do. I won't give the thing up. Everybody says go buy an Android, and I keep going, well, it still works. It works well for me. I'm not giving that up. But if it's a GPU, it has firmware. If it's a processor system board, it has firmware. Firmware is found in every device, whether that's a computer, a notebook, a server, a phone, an IoT device. Many of these smart devices, in fact all of them, if they're smart, have some type of firmware in them. So what is firmware? Well, years ago we called it the basic input-output subsystem, right? And by us was one of those things that we talked about. And we'd all go in there and we'd hack together what memory range was going to be used by a given port, what interrupt was going to be called on the bus, those types of things that were configurable items as we move forward. I actually remember the earlier computers where you didn't get that chance. It booted or it didn't, and if it didn't, I'm so sorry.
You changed the switch on the card.
You changed the switch on the card. That's absolutely right. And back in the day, hard switches were really what we had available to us. If it was you changed the switch on the card and it still didn't come up, didn't give you any beeps, might have been a sad day. You were looking to buy a chip from your manufacturer and put it into your device so that you could get your BIOS back because you bricked it somehow, some way, and that was something that happened. So firmware really sits below the operating system. It sets up all of these initial configuration values for us, and then of course hands off to a boot handler, and Microsoft Windows comes up, right? Or in somebody's case, right? Linux, Unix, etc. So that's how we actually start that microkernel, and we're able to get that system rolling. So it's found in virtual devices as well. And the interesting thing that as I began doing this work a few months ago, the Spectrum meltdown thing is what kind of led me into this. Now I have a background in hardware from NCR, so firmware was something that we did back in the day. Worked with a lot of smart people that did that firmware. But looking at physical devices, it hit easily for me. But I'm not a VMware guy, and so I was amazed to find out they have a nice abstraction layer and a firmware virtualization that's available there. So it exists on-prem and in the cloud. Firmware's all around us. Nowadays, anybody here have a smart refrigerator? How about a camera? Anybody got a camera, a real camera? Yeah, so you've got firmware on those devices. We're injecting firmware at a high rate of speed, all of these smart devices. Your dryer, I've got a customer actually that manufactures dryers, and they say, how are we going to keep from having, issues with our systems not getting taken over? So they're thinking about security for dryers. That's how big security opportunities are. It's configurable, and like we were talking about, whether it was a hardwire switch in the back in the old days, or it was something in the BIOS where you would enter that in front of it. It's still configurable, but it's largely unguarded. How many of you ever set the password for your BIOS? I did it once, I forgot the password, and never did it again. That may very well change though, given what's occurring in the environment. So, it initializes, the BIOS initializes and enumerates these devices, whether they're, CD-ROMs, video cards, et cetera, so forth and so on in your system. In the old days, it was largely a 16-bit operating mode, if you will, had a whole meg of memory, big space. Now, I'm telling you the story from much later down the line. We all know that when we originally got started, that space was much smaller. I'll take you back to old days with our Commodores, our Trash 380 or Trash 80s, and we had a very, very small space to work in. It certainly it defines the total hard drive capacity and had a super slow boot process due to that 16-bit process, and it was largely implemented via a ROM chip, which was, as it says, read-only memory. So when we look at firmware maturing in life, we moved up from there, and nowadays we're talking about things like extensions for power management, configurability, larger hard drive capacity. Things are getting better, if you will, or they have been getting better. And the important piece here is that we went to an EEPROM, a electronically erasable PROM device, which was writable. It was still writable. In fact, when its earliest came out, you had a little window, a little black piece of tape over that. When the consumer pulled that back because they were in there digging around and then called you up because it wouldn't boot, that was one of the first things you looked at. It's like, did you pull that tape off? Well, yeah. I think we charged $20 back in that day, right? You know, and we got back in the car, gave him the advice from the driveway and said, see, I can't help you. You need to order something. We sell those, by the way. So in about 1998, we saw a transition to what's called the Extensible Firmware Interface, or EFI, and that gave us a few more features and a new hub. Couldn't help, right? Who doesn't like Star Wars? The Unified Extended Firmware Interface is now an industry-wide standard. So if you're not using UEFI, you have a fairly old system at this point. It gives us the ability to have a number of capacity increases. This all got developed by AMD, Microsoft, once again, and PC manufacturers, as well as Intel. They drove the implementation, largely because, of course, Intel is their chip maker for processors. It was first implemented in our old friend Windows Vista SP1, and that would be available for that particular platform, but not implemented in Windows 7. So it's been around quite some time. In fact, if you have a Windows 7 system now, you have a fairly old computer. Gave us drive capacities in excess of 2.2 terabyte. We can go up to 9.4 zettabytes. So, we're talking about some pretty good stuff. And it does this by launching separate executables. So firmware now is really complex. It's a microkernel with subsystems in it. It handles a number of different actions. It does provide you significantly more addressable space, and obviously secure booting as well as networking. Don't have to be there. In the old days, you wanted to change the BIOS. Guess what? We get to get in the car and go to that data center, find rack 7, open that cage, get into that BIOS and make that change. The big benefit here is we have an increased startup and shutdown speed. Now, I'm sure that you're all very, very familiar with that. Here comes your trouble. When you have a writable firmware, you have the capability to make changes to it. And firmware is essentially very unmanaged code in your operating environments. Anybody here have access into data centers for your employer or yourself? Most of these like a password. Later I'll talk about the TPM chip. My experiences show me that most of those TPM chips are not turned on. What we're seeing today is firmware level exploits and vulnerabilities that are essentially global, fairly ubiquitous. Cisco Sinful Knock was one that came by recently. I know we've talked about Spectre Meltdown at this point, which is a vulnerability created by an architecture in the processor. Lenovo, back right after Christmas, said, oh, guess what? We fixed a problem in our BIOS. It's 14 years old, but you don't have to worry about it. If you've heard about the Mirai botnet, it's one of the largest botnets in the world. You can rent the Mirai botnet today so that you can drive your own DDoS attacks against your adversaries. I wouldn't recommend it. And as well, we've seen a number of BrickerBot against refrigerators, cameras. So they're now starting to see that I can pick out different devices, identify them with malware coming in over the wire, finding the BIOS version, and then saying, is that a payload or is it not? Who remembers Stuxnet? So that was a specific type of malware intended to take out the centrifuges of the Iranian nuclear refinement program. They looked for a very specific type of firmware that ran those centrifuges, and we were able to proliferate Stuxnet across the world. It didn't impact anybody's PC, laptop, workstation, server, although we were all infected by it. It only hit those centrifuges, 8 separate centrifuges. And so what they did was, put it out in the world. They knew that eventually it'd get onto some device, get taken into that facility, and find those centrifuges and take them out.
And is it a is it a good guess that Spectre, our military is looking at using that against free?
I would say it's probably a good guess, yes. I think more significantly, our adversaries, we now know that our attackers are well organized, they're gold, that they're put together in teams, they have specific jobs within the organization One guy focuses on egress, another guy focuses on maintaining the channel. They have a manager. They have, all of the things that we have in a normal work environment. Those people are not done. And they're going to set it up such that we're going to see more of this firmware-based attack. That's why Spectre Meltdown was such a panic for us, because not only was it a low layer in the firmware, but it also opened up privileges in that processor that were not typically available in the user space.
Our 600 or so nuclear silos that we have out west, are they relatively safe because they're running off of trash 80s?
What's that, sir?
Our 600 or so nuclear silos that we have in Nebraska and whatnot, are they relatively safe because they're so old and running off of trash 80s?
I'll say this. Security is a state of mind. We work very hard in response to the attackers, but inevitably they're looking for a way to penetrate. And so while I think that they would like to get a hold of those trash 80s, I don't know if they will or not. And it may be a happenstance. Anybody see recently that all the guys that are out in Afghanistan with a Fitbit on, and they run and have a certain loop, got picked up on a heat map? So that's an example of how we give away information that we normally wouldn't give away. The attackers are looking at that data. Again, their goal, that's their job. Their manager says, I need more intel on this. So I wouldn't let out that anything is out of the realm of possibility. One of the great things about the UAG product, when I was here at Microsoft, it was developed by an Israeli company because the Israeli government specifies you cannot connect a computer system to the internet directly. And so the first incantation of that box that we purchased into Microsoft was called Whale eGap. And it was literally two nodes, one that sat on the outside and received all the calls. It had the listeners. One that sat on the inside, and it was connected via a SCSI bus. And one of the reasons I went to that group was because I was the developer of the Q720 chip for the Q720 card at NCR, which was a wide differential SCSI bus card that gave us 4 different SCSI buses available. So at the end of the day, firmware attacks critical systems. They exfiltrate data, and they set up persistent backdoors. This is important because when I run a SIEM system, anybody here have a nice QRadar implementation? We'd love for you to have one if you don't. It's not a bad product, and I'm not here to sell you QRadar. One of the things that's great about SIEMs is they give you great visibility into your environment. They tell you about actors which are coming in, they're knocking on the door, so you'll see IP addresses from Ukraine, and then you'll see other types of communication which you may have triggered rules for that fall into your SIEMs log. Firmware exploits, don't hit those. They right under that. In fact, we suspect firmware will figure out a way to be able to undervolt. Typically when we have a bus type system in computing, we'll have a 5-volt hard knee, so it's a square wave. They'll figure out how to make it 3.2 volts. And they'll trigger off that 3-volt level. And that'll allow them to covertly speak on the same electric bus that we're using to send data on. A very significant piece of this that you have to really, really look at. Any questions? I think we're all really super familiar with firmware, so just wanted to make sure that we're getting those pieces covered. So, governance, regulation, compliance. You have a QRadar system at your work?
Yeah, I'm a NIST 853 and a HIPAA person.
We should talk. So here's some of the relative governance and regulations that you should be concerned with regard to securing your firmware. Specifically, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, PRDS-6, NIST SP 853. Anybody do an 853 audit? Anybody ever participate on setting this up? If you're in large environments, you're probably having this occur around you. If you're not involved with them, you may be seeing questions come in from your management, other people, and it's non-obvious what they're asking about. You answer the question and move on. Anybody here work with the federal government as a supplier? So DFARS would be your friend, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. High Trust CSF is another one, HIPAA clearly, and the last one is new on the scene, GDPR, or just GD generally is what we call it in my job, the General Data Protection Regulation. Why is this important? Well, let me show you some stuff here. What does NIST say about this? In regards to your firmware, in order to make compliance for 853 SI2, your organization, and I'm not big on reading this to you, but I'm sure it's an eye chart from the back, centrally manages the flaw remediation process and installs updates automatically. When Spectre Meltdown came out, how many of you had an automatic patch system that covered your Spectre Meltdown problem? Nobody should raise their hand because there wasn't one. The organization automated mechanisms to periodically and upon demand determine the state of information system components with regard to flaw remediation. So I'm supposed to be able to go look at that system and say, Tuesday I had this version of firmware. Today I have what version on there now. Most people that I've talked to in regards to this say, well, about once a year or so we take a clipboard, particularly if we're going to do a restart during the holiday season, and we record that BIOS version and we move on. The thing about it is attackers are very smart, and they will make that version number match what is on there so that they obfuscate whether or not they have infiltrated you. If you don't have a way to put a signature or a hash on that firmware, you have no way to truly prove what you're really looking at. Moving on to SI3.C, it configures a malicious code protection mechanism to, one, perform periodic scans. And I won't read the rest of this. If you want to talk in depth, we'll go into that piece, but I won't burn all of our time up here on this. Or block malicious code, quarantine malicious code, send an alert to the administrator in response to malicious code detection, and ad nauseum. You will be responsive, it says. You will go out and you will determine whether you have good code on your firmware. This applies to your firmware as well. Why does it apply to your firmware? Well, now we know we have a problem with firmware there. And there are things that you can do to take advantage of the knowledge that you now have that firmware could be updated maliciously on your systems. 853 SI7 goes on to say the information system performs an integrated check. And they'll let you organizationally define this, obviously, of your firmware at startup and transitional states or security-related events. So how many of you have ever read in the event log, XYZ box restarted? So we'll see the triple event log for the Windows systems, or you may see some for the Unix systems. You ever read that at your SOC? What happens when that comes up? Do you go out and actually look at that system? Why did that system restart? Was it a graceful shutdown? Or did it bend, panic, blue screen of death, whatever you like calling it, and then come back up? These are the signals that something is going on in your environment. I have a large tax and accounting customer that has a worldwide presence, and they said, these 4 boxes continue to restart every day. And I said, when did you know of this? Last week. I said, what time does it restart? Whatever number it was, 1:30. And I said, does it do it every day? And they said, yeah. And I said, please take the mini dump and put it onto a package and send it to you. A mini dump? Yes. A mini dump, it's on there, it's configured, I'll take it and take a look at it. You know that? Yes, I worked at Microsoft. It's a Microsoft operating system. I don't have this access to the private symbols that I used to have, but I have enough knowledge to be able to look at that and go, is this a driver-based issue or is something else going on? Fortunately for them, it it was a driver-based issue where they were attempting to do an update. But that's the type of profile of behavior you would see if I was attacking you, trying to insert malware, whether that was in the application, the network, on the platform, or more importantly, at the firmware layer, because you'd never see the update for that firmware. Interestingly enough, one of the things I talked to an analyst at IBM, and I think that they're wonderful folks at IBM. I won't tell you that they're the smartest eggs in the basket at times. But this young lady came from NSA. She has done cyber intelligence there, and she says, Dan, what we're seeing right now is that our attackers are replaying attacks from 10 years ago, which tells us something. How many of you have had a poodle attack or a robot attack in the last 60, 70 days? If you have an IPS system or a load balancer, you want to go out and look at your RSA crypto and make sure that you're not susceptible to those. Because the new poodle and robot attacks are the same old RSA attacks that were done 19 years ago. That tells us that they're running out of plays in their playbook. We're doing a very good job of defending the application, the network, and the platform underneath. We don't do much for the firmware. If I'm an attacker and I have to find a soft spot, because I'm not going to go after your hardened places, right? Why would I try that? That'd be like wasting a lot of my effort. I'm going to look for somewhere very soft. So it's important that you follow SI7, particularly if you're a large organization doing business. I'm sure that you probably have some great information there. 853 SI7 subpart 3, software firmware information integrity checks. The organization employs centrally managed integrity verification tools. This does not mean that I can have a SIEM system and that it works, because SIEM systems don't check firmware. You have to figure out another way to get down to the brass tacks. Moving along, SI7 subpart 6, and I didn't pull all these out. I just wanted to show you how voluminous these regulations or guidance are for these systems. Information systems implement cryptographic mechanisms to detect unauthorized changes to software, firmware, and information. If you've been doing 853, you've been signing off on this, you are not in compliance. You have an audit issue that is going to come back to you because your firmware, I can almost guarantee, has not been cryptographically defended with some mechanism to detect changes and authorize changes. Ad nauseum and so on. This next slide, we could go on for quite some time. I would spend quite a bit of time here. As you see, I'm moving through these slides fairly quickly. I think you're getting the idea. NIST says you need to defend your firmware, not just your software. Everybody does a great job with software. We now have signed code. We don't run unsigned code in the environment. We're hardening our environment. We have, all manner of encryption for data in flight, data at rest, but we're not doing anything for firmware. GDPR. If you're a multinational organization and you're handling the information handled by a subject of the British Crown, or you are taking data from inside of the EU. 3 weeks ago, in relation to Spectre Meltdown, the GDPR Council came out and said, we strongly recommend, actually I'll give you my British interpretation, not to align with their speech. We strongly, therefore, strongly recommend that organizations determine which of their systems are vulnerable and test and apply the patches as a matter of urgency. Failure to patch known vulnerabilities is a factor the ICO takes into account when determining whether a breach of the 7th principle of Data Protection Act is serious enough to warrant a civil monetary penalty. This applies to guys who are doing Spectre Meltdown. They got so many calls about Spectre Meltdown over and over. They put this out. They're telling me in no uncertain terms, we will be more than happy to charge you the highest penalties which apply. We have a monetary penalty. You sit in Hoboken, New Jersey, you deal with EU-based data, and you have a breach as a result of that, exposing an EU subject's data, 4% of your worldwide gross revenue will be levied upon you. So whatever your number was last year, multiply that by 4%. That's the check you're going to stroke to your friends across the pond. All because you don't have a way to be able to show an audit trail that you took ordinary care with your firmware. Questions on that before we go farther? Come back.
Things have me scratch my head about something that I've just wondered about as far as meltdown in particular goes, or some of these other vulnerabilities. Is, my understanding, it was mainly targeted at Intel and AMD processors. But traditionally people think of Microsoft and Linux as being the firmware. But aren't like things like routers, switches, portable as well?
It's almost every processor style which has the same core architectural vulnerabilities. It's not just a Intel Cyrix. You might remember the old Cyrix processor, an Intel Cyrix based issue. If you go out and look at the actual vulnerability alerts, almost every processor style is listed within that alert. And so when you see that, when you see Microsoft come out and issue a patch, they are doing a workaround. What they're doing is basically saying, does anybody know what I said when I was talking about when I say application pre-execution caching routine? Jose probably knows about this. So application pre-execution caching, let's say that every morning on your workstation you start up at 8 o'clock and the first thing you click on is Outlook. Well, the operating system knows this because it sees you launch that executable over and over again. So in order to make it faster to start, it pre-executes it in a small area and then sidelines that thread. Application pre-execution caching is specifically the feature that vulnerability for Spectre Meltdown really impacts. So Microsoft says, well, guess what? We'll defeaturize our APIs so that we don't do that anymore. Now, Outlook takes 500 forevers to start, right? I mean, it's a big program, It's all about performance and getting started. So they defeaturize in the operating system, but that doesn't mean that the processor underneath doesn't have that issue still. That I can't cross from the user space into the executive space and read that protected memory segment and take that information back out and do something with it. You still have that vulnerability. Until you defeaturize your firmware, it's still there in the processor. And if you do defeaturize your firmware, who's to say that a month from now when that system restarts and the guy at the knob goes, that box restarted the third time this week, so what, I don't care. And then you find out that you picked up a BIOS-based or firmware-based malware that has refeaturized that for them so that they can then cross the user space into the executive space and see all of that protected and privileged memory. Make sense? That's where the vulnerability really is. That's why defending your firmware is super important. Once I put all the little legs together, I started looking for some solutions. And it took me a little while to find ways to combat firmware adulteration. And so once I had that pulled together, then I realized I need to call Kevin York over at the CITPG so they can tell everybody else so they can go out and do their due diligence and make sure things don't happen. So I got a really super important note on dirty silicon for you here. So everybody knows how wafers are produced, right? This is how we make the processor. We draw out a silicon rod. We dope that with some type of agent like germanium, for example, is an element that we'll use to set up these channels. So in this top block over here, this is basically pure silicon, and you can see that basically all the electrons fit in all the holes. And in order to excite that silicon, we have to, in the second block down here, dope it with, for example, like I said, germanium. to be able to create a hole. Where is my hole in this picture? Aha, my hole, right here. So what does that allow me to do? It allows electrons to jump, these free electrons jump from here to this hole, and that means that now they're in this covalent area. This particular atom of silicon is excited. Let's not get that mixed up, right? As it comes around, it sees, hey, there's a hole here. I can jump to that space. That's how we create channels within silicon. So when we talk about processor manufacturer, chip manufacturer, that's what they're doing. They're doping the silicon to create these new holes that are available in there and therefore set up these channels. So if I'm a bad actor, one of the ways I can help myself is to go and dope it for my use. And that is not an unknown thing. I have a vertical flight manufacturer in Texas. I won't tell you who they are because, of course, that's what we do in security. But they said, Dan, we won't buy from anybody but Dell. And I said, why is that? Back then, I was ignorant. I'm still ignorant, but I was more ignorant back then. So I said, why is that? They said, well, we figured out that nation-state actors like China and Russia are infiltrating the manufacturing facilities in China, and they're doping these silicon rods so that they have covert side channels in the silicon. What I'm telling you about today, the firmware piece, I can't do anything in regards to this with the defense of the firmware. If you dope the silicon at the physical chip layer, there's nothing I can do to make that different. And the only way to determine if you have one of these side channels in your silicon is a destructive test. So it's not like I can go hook it up to a machine and go, hey look, some more electrons piled out the other end. This thing must be dirty. They have to actually destroy the wafer and then analyze what's in that wafer. Think about gas chromatograph, being able to determine what types of materials are found in there, and then say, it is most likely that this is clean or dirty. And they can't get it down to, we think this is what is there. I do know of one, what's called field effect transistor. Anybody have an electronics background? Yep. So BJTs came out first, then we went to FETs, right? There is a FET side channel that has been found in the wild that is actually doped like this, so that they have that to leverage on export. I can't do much about that. If you have this problem, there's nothing to worry about. This is an issue with your supply chain and an issue with your physical security, which is why my friend, the security guard here at the back, is such an important person, because he's the guy who's going to say, I'm sorry, sir, but it's not today.
So you're saying that Dell doesn't use Chinese chips, is that what you're?
I think they do, but I think they have a very good manufacturing process. I'm not going to discuss exactly what goes into that, but they have a strong physical security and good QA process on their silicon chips coming from their vendor. Make sense? Any questions? It's a little bit confusing. We're down to some chemistry and electronics. So I can't do anything about this piece. But what I can do something about is if I have a GPU that goes out one of my servers, I call in my smart hands with an RMA, they come in and put another video card in, and guess what? Firmware on that video card is tainted. It has malware on it. That I can help. I can do it with about 3 different ways. And this is what took me some time to figure out. So, cloud integrity technology from Intel, believe it or not, these people developed a way to be able to determine if you have integrity in firmware for a system. Another company called HighTrust, they have a commercial solution that's built for VMware. And then there's a third company, and this is one of my, in the interest of being above board and very clear, I know the people at Trapezoid. I've worked with them pretty closely over the last couple of months. Not here to sell you Trapezoid, so you don't panic. They have an extensive commercial solution that does exactly what CIT and HighTrust do and a little more. So these are the 3 solutions that I found. Now there's others that are out there, but they're not extensible, they're not comprehensive, and I discarded them pretty quickly.
Are these applications or are these things that work at a lower level?
These are platforms that actually listen to that lower level where the firmware lives. Now, I'm going to go through some of what this does. So, the Intel Cloud Integrity Technology, am I good on time? I got about 15 minutes.
If you want to break, you can. Or
I'm rolling through. I figured I probably had an hour to conversate. So, the Intel Cloud Integrity Technology, it provides visibility into cloud data centers. And it leverages a specific piece of telemetry information on your baseboard called TPM, or Trusted Execution Technology. So TXT, Trusted Execution Technology, tied in with TPMs is how they do it. Again, when I go into the customer's environments and start talking with them about this, no password in 90% of the occasions, and almost 100% of them don't turn the TPM chip on. They perceive that to be some type of overhead, they're going to have to futz with that, they don't want them. So they never just turn it on. If you are running BitLocker technology, you are running your TPM. That's the only way BitLocker actually operates. If you were an old direct access customer from back in the day with Microsoft, you're running the TPM chip, because that's how that operates. The biggest thing I saw about this is it requires a significant skill set. Little VMware vSphere, my hat's off to you people who have VMware vSphere backgrounds. That is a separate world of insanity that I won't go into. I have people I call when I have questions there. Citrix Zen, it's been a while for Zen now, but still, again, it's a virtualization technology and it allows this to drive a different workload within their environment. That's, again, another one of those specific types of skills. And then the kernel-based virtual machines, Windows 2012, Hyper-V 2012, some basic networking, which is not so basic anymore. And, like they say about common sense, it ain't so common. Networking is a difficult skill for me to find nowadays. And then Ubuntu. So if you're a Linux distro kind of type person and you have that background, you've got one of the core sets of information that you have to be able to set up CIT. What CIT doesn't give you is the continuous monitoring that's required by your 853 to be able to say, yes, this firmware is the version that I started with today, last week, last month, etc. Questions there before I leave that slide? It's just kind of a feature set overview of cloud integrity technology. Everybody following me? Got one thumbs up. I'm just going to last long. So I put this nasty gnarly picture up here for one very good reason, and that's to outline how complex CIT is. If you look over here, the various components that are required, these are all specific and distinct roles that you need to establish on server equipment to be able to drive this particular technology. What is that? 7 different roles: an attestation server, a key broker server, a key broker proxy, We just keep on and on and on. Back in the day, anything that was super complex, we would write all these KVs for, and we try to go through and go, okay, now you do this, and now you do that. Okay, and if you're not this person, you have to do that part, or if you have, this, it goes here for SP1, here for SP3, a lot of different moving parts. Those are super headaches for your administrative staff, and every step is an opportunity for them to make a mistake. And that means that your costs go up.
But isn't this a basic architecture for PKI generally? Right, you got trust, you got
Absolutely.
And key service.
It absolutely is built on a basic architecture for PKI. You're absolutely right. So there's another one, right? If you don't know PKI, don't have a good understanding for it, like to do a cross-chain one day, go see how crazy the world gets when you start doing one of these cross-chain servers. So the trusted execution technology is only available here. This does not work with other integrity technologies. So it's very siloed, very complex, it has a lot of server sprawl in it, but it's an open source product, it's free. So we all know that when they say it's free, generally it's going to be super hard to implement. I pulled this data off their GitHub. It's been 8 months since there was a update to it. Intel was not the last person that updated there, by the way. So we're now in open source world. There are a few people in the world that I trust in open source land. Most of those folks are not the contributors in open source. I'm not saying they're bad folks. I just don't know them. I don't have any way to figure out whether they put their own backdoor into the code. I certainly can sit there for hours and days and weeks and digest what's in their code, but that doesn't mean that I didn't miss something, because we're all human. So you can see that there have been a number of releases, and it's kind of just petering down into the end. So this is kind of coming to the end of its life. Somebody has to maintain it. We would hope that perhaps Intel would go back out and refresh that. Questions on CIT? So another solution, when you look up CIT or cloud integrity technology, you start seeing these references to high trust. And I had always known HI trust, as in the spec, the standard, the reference, but not this company, High Trust. They were formed in 2007. You might be very surprised to find out that since they work with VMware, most of their executives are former VMware executives. It is a VMware vSphere appliance. From what I can tell, its last cost base that I can figure out is about $3,000, so it's not cheap. It's not super expensive. It's not like an IPS or something for carrier grade communication, but still, $3,000 will buy a used car. Requires the trusted platform module, obviously. Leverages the TXT technology or trusted execution technology. Provides an attestation service, so it will tell you in VMware only. It won't do that for your IoT or IOMT or your mobile devices or any of the physical systems. It does it in VMware. It will give you an attestation service, the TAS. It's got some good feature sets. I don't want to knock it because it does form a layer of isolation between your administrators and the overall infrastructure. And it provides good geofencing, meaning I can't take a trusted system and move it to an untrusted workload area, right? So that's not what I want when we do that VMware movement. vMotion, I think is what they call it. I don't want to vMotion these systems over here to an untrusted platform. The biggest deal, it doesn't provide the continuous monitoring, which is required in the 853. So if those virtualized systems pick up firmware that is tainted, you won't know until you go back and rerun and get your marker sets again. Does it make sense? I mean, it's good stuff. I'm not saying it's not. This may be a bit of an eye chart. I know I have problems reading it myself. Again, it's called High Trust Cloud Control. Provides authentication, authorization, and auditing, or we used to call it AAA. The High Trust Data Control, and it provides the strong encryption for the virtual machines. High Trust Key Control, we talked about the PKI system. Won't go into that anymore. And then the Cloud Advisor segment that go together. So a number of pieces are brought together to form an ecosystem. They rely on the same basic componentry that our friend CIT did. And in some of the later slides, I'll show you how they work together, CIT and High Trust. So Intel says, hey, here's a free tool so that you can get attestation. High Trust says, yeah, here's a free tool for attestation, and I'm going to charge you for the machine to be able to do it with VMware, right? So now you're covered in the cloud and in the physical, right? And, oh, by the way, you get to set all this stuff up for CIT, and if it doesn't work, well, High Trust will tell you, well, that's not ours. We don't do that part. Go Go back to CIT, call up Intel and start asking questions over there. Nice guys at Intel. I work with a lot of people that actually moved from NCR over to Intel, but it's difficult to call Intel and say, hey, Word's having a problem, and I think it's because of your processor. They don't take that type of input off the street. So my third thing that I found was this company in Miami called Trapezoid. And I thought, well, this looks really gimmicky and sweet, but let's see what happens. They have remote attestation. In other words, I can tell from afar in a centralized console, remember my 853 requirements, that the firmware I am running today is the firmware that I ran yesterday and is the verified firmware that was issued by Intel. And they not only do it in the VMware cloud with this, but they can do it for Cisco, who publishes a library of hashes that they can then look up, and they will compare these hash values.
So how do you hash a firmware on a live system?
So there's something called a PCR, a process control register, and you can look at the PCR value. It's going to be a static value. It may be the version. It may be some serialized number. There are a number of PCRs that you can actually look at. You take those, glob them together, build your hash, and that's your hash. So yes, it's possible that I could beat on this and figure out what my hash was, but there are like 38 separate PCR registers.
So if someone diddled with the version, you'd still fail your
You'd
hash.
still fail your hash, and your attribution would be called into question. Again, that's the second bullet, the tamper evident machine ID via their marker, which is they build that hash off PCR values. CIT, HiTrust, and Trapezoid, they all use those PCR values to be able to build that hash, to build an attestation. No different here. So they do give you continuous monitoring and reporting. They have a dashboard, architecture, right? Single pane of glass. How many people have shown up in your office and they go, it's a single pane of glass? I want to show them that single pane of glass when they do that, when you leave, because that's just not a selling point for me anymore. You go into anybody's NOC today, SOC today, they've got like 5 screens. Some of them have scaffolding, just like we used to upstairs when we supported Exchange. I knew a guy who had 8 screens going. That single pane of glass business, yeah, it doesn't work. It's nice, but it doesn't really tell the story. But they do provide that continuous monitoring. So what they can do is they can go out, for example, for your Cisco router, right? You're worried about having central knock on, and you can test every hour if you wanted to. You can test every 5 minutes, but the hash calculation is an overhead, so you wouldn't want to do it at that frequency. But every hour, every half hour, you'd probably get away with that with no problem, as long as you weren't running the backbone of the internet across it at 90% processor, 100% bandwidth type things. You don't want to do that, obviously, but you can recalculate that hash off the PCR values, then compare the two. Yes, I have, or no, I do not have the correct firmware versions on my Cisco router. Same thing for endpoints. One of the things we see in the oil and gas industry is that they have a number of these wells. Anybody ever been to Texas? I love Texas. Man, I tell you, it's hot as blue blazes out there. They have all of these wells, and somebody has to ride out to these wells and they record all these values about different types of gases being emitted from the well and pressures and this kind of thing. Well, guess what? IoT solved a lot of that, because there's no danger to an IoT device if the wellhead explodes. Nobody's going to suffocate in some noble gas that's coming out of the ground. And they get good data continuously instead of intermittent. And so what do? They hung all of these IoT devices out there. Well, guess what?
They're okay.
If I'm an attacker, right? How do I get into their network? Well, I just go get my same IoT device, I suck their code off, put it on my device with my firmware exploit, and I put it back in place. The guy at the NOC, SOC, whatever goes, did you see that sensor 37 went offline for like 15 or 20 minutes? And it's back online now? What's up with that? The dude next to him goes, "It's lunchtime," they never say it again. And that's how these guys get in, because they have an anomaly that's not being watched. They're not monitoring the firmware on these IoT devices, and that can set up their ability to build command and control, egress of information, all of the wonderful things that we worry about at the router, at the firewall, at the IPS, in the application, on the platform. All of this happens below that level. We'll never see it because we're not paying attention to that data, and we're not defending our property. The trapezoid system has a little unique wrinkle to it in that they collect additional data. When I was down in Florida with my friends at the CISSP Congress, I met the guy who was the product manager for Cisco Trusted Technologies, right? And so he's all about this. And I started talking to him about it. And he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "we get all this information." And he said, the issue we have is supportability for these systems. He said they're just chock full of dust bunnies and whatnot because they've been running in some nasty environment. And then, they go out at 2 in the morning. And then, of course, it's a mild scramble, for us. It's a wild scramble for the customer. It becomes a supportability issue for them. And then, of course, we have an RMA, a smart hand that goes out, and we put the new device in. And I said, well, I know this other company that they actually collect that data. So if they collect that information, and you saw the fan speed going down, wouldn't that be, an important thing? And he was like, oh, completely. So having information like fan speed, like undercurrent, overcurrent, over voltage, under voltage, are all critical signals for engineers at the Cisco NOC where you call in for support. They take this data from you, they look at it and go, PSU2 is X amount of current, X amount of voltage. There's a lot going on right here. Something's happening here on this system. It also turns out that when you run systems really hard, if you've ever looked at their telemetry, you'll remember that their current and their voltage goes up and their temperatures go up. Their fan speeds stay high. They never go back into that idle. So those are signals that when somebody is infiltrating you, they're attacking you, that you are having an issue going on. If you have this information coming back to a centralized place, you can then take action upon that by being able to analyze that beyond the attestation. They have time travel capabilities, so in other words, it's not just today. They can roll this thing back in time. One of the things that we did at Microsoft many years ago was time travel debugging, being able to roll back what was the state on the processor as we were having the problem, before we were having the problem, so we knew what it looked like when it was good, what it looked like when it was going on, and how did it recover, right? And so that's an aspect of this particular platform that's very valuable, not only from just collecting metrics, but being able to look at PCR values and when this marker went invalid versus when it was not. So we now know what time frame to start looking at, so that when we do our IR, incident response, we can now start looking at this specific set of time versus give me all the logs for the last 2 months because I think somebody came in the back door and set up a malware system, and now they're serving out movies to Germans that we have detected because somebody called us up and said, hey, did you know that there's a German movie server website on your web server? That happened to one of my customers when I was here at Microsoft doing TMG support. They said, hey, we got a web server. Somebody called us and said that they could download movies from our web server. And we don't do movies. We do whatever, right? Toy guns. And I was like, and they were like, well, TMG should have defended us from that. And I'm like, well, give me the data and let me go start looking and figure out when this happened to you. The biggest thing about Trapezoid is they stand alone. They can do all the things the other two can do, but if you've invested in CIT and high trust, they actually work with them. They add the continuous monitoring component that's not available in the other two platforms. Questions there? Down front?
You mentioned Intel, and certainly for most servers in most places, that's
Intel
where
inside.
we are.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at more of the enterprise, you may have AMD
Absolutely.
processors. Is this dependent on the Intel?
CIT High Trust leverages the TPM chip. Therefore, we are an Intel-only type of platform. These guys at Trapezoid don't have to have that. They can do a hash based off of values that they pick up within the processor, within the BIOS, etc. So they set up their own markers based on that information. They will work with TPM. They want to work with TPM. In fact, TPM or TAM in the Cisco world actually has a certificate store built on the chip, and you can actually access that. And that's not a quote-unquote Intel architecture. So, any questions here? So this eye chart kind of defines, if you will, what it might look like from a block diagram perspective. When you have both Trapezoid, High Trust, and CIT together, they work in an integrated fashion together. But again, this would be in a VMware environment. You still have your Trapezoid taking an attestation report from CIT, attestation servers, and then it would be taking attestation report data. Should have put data on this one over here from High Trust. That actually comes from PCR values that come through the vSphere API, and they actually build that and then are able, Trapezoid, to provide that continuous monitoring of all these other devices over here. These are obviously not VMware devices. I don't know of any VMware devices that run for IoT, bare metal servers, or Cisco networks. Of course, that might be a little bit of a misnomer as we are in the cloud phase, right? So that's one of the ways they all three work together. Here in this block diagram, well, guess what? I just chopped off High Trust. So I saved $3,000. I put my engineers and technologists through probably a month or so of really heavy grinding, and they're fairly angry. I'm going to have to take them out to lunch because they implemented CIT for me. The Trapezoid will get PCR values as well as CIT attestation server and be able to report in a continuous fashion only because Trapezoid is in that particular mix. And again, I'm not here to sell you Trapezoid, CIT, or High Trust. That is not my intent. I'm pointing out what I found that have all of the 853 pieces that you have to meet compliance. We're not there yet. Last one, Trapezoid only. These guys are able to get to PCR values. They continuously monitor for changes in integrity, and they generate the attestation report for, again, same set of systems.
What about alerting?
Alerting, you can go back from Trapezoid. They have a message bus. They can go into QRadar. They can go into Splunks. They can go into a number of different alerting sources, logging sources, scenes interfaces. I'm not showing that here, but yes, that alerting element is in there. That's one of the biggest pieces. I don't see that when I look at my friends, High Trust CIT. Forget about my buddy Trapezoid over there. They don't have as good an alerting and logging capability. They built a fairly robust message bus and it's Trapezoid. So I think, honestly, if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick the Trapezoid one, to be very honest. It's got some interesting price points. I'm not trying to sell you again, but if you have to implement this, you can pick the your own, the CIT. If it's a VMware environment, you can go a little further and do High Trust, but you're still not meeting that continuous monitoring aspect. You have poor alerting and reporting. Putting all three of them together, or either going to the one alone, is probably the place to be. And with that, I'm about 10 minutes over what I thought I would be. Questions?
The SI7 stuff on firmware, where is that in Rev 4?
And this one referred. That's correct. That's current. That's one of the things that I did when I started looking at this. And again, I got led to this through Spectre Meltdown. Everybody said, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Da, 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 da. And I was like, well, just defeaturize the thing, right? It's going to come out from Intel, defeaturize the actual the BIOS firmware, right? And you're good to go. And that's when Asuza told me, he was like, well, how do I need that SI7? And I was like, hold on one second, I think I got a phone call coming in. So I think you're going to meet that by, come on. And so, you know, it really was one of those awakening moments. And I had to tell him, I don't know the answer for every day. I'm going to have to go do some research and start putting together some systems that actually meet all of your regulatory and governance requirements that are auditable, and be able to come up with that. CIT and high trust, very little audit capability. That time travel component that's in the trapezoid piece has great auditable information, and plus you're pumping it in your SIEM system. Everybody I know that runs a centralized SIEMs log says, don't let that box go down, right? Because they have a requirement. They have to be able to go back 12 months, 18 months, depends on what type of vertical they're in. They have to be able to roll that data back for an auditor and go, yep, here it starts. There's no breaks. It's continuous, contiguous. We don't have any issues here. We can prove the data that we logged is, a continuous type of thing. Any other questions?
I have a comment. I'm thinking about all this big problems, people, in this security. It's like you said, the something will just not get with it, like if something happens, and then you may hear about it. You say, well, when were you aware of this? Oh,
Right.
well, what was your response? Well,
We went to lunch.
yeah.
It didn't seem like it was
The
very.
whole war started to roll up, and they're going, I had lunch,
It's
I
true.
know that.
Right. Looking at, you bringing up a good point. So I'll harp a little on my security soapbox and say, we really still have a problem with education. It's one of the biggest things. The South Carolina Department of Revenue issue where we egress every taxpayer's PII, every dependent's PII, all of the bank account information in the state of South Carolina. We did not leave one stone unturned with data. That was all because somebody said, hey, look, this picture of Bill catching a fish. And then somebody down the line said, that's weird. Bill's been here all day. He hasn't been fishing. What's going on? Well, I clicked on it to open it up in email. There's people all the time. I was sitting with a lady from the Department of Defense. She told me that they had hired a young man who was highly qualified. And this kind of goes to the challenge of cybersecurity thing that you were talking about, getting young people involved. They still don't understand that when they click on things that are sent by somebody from the outside, those are probably not wholesome things for them to click on in an environment, right? And so this young man actually clicked on that. He picked up a virus. They came and cleaned it off. 30 minutes later, he clicked on it again. After they cleaned it off, he clicked on it a third time that day. The only thing that kept him from clicking on it the fourth and final time is, and if you do DoD work, you know that you have 4 times that you can be kicked off the net, is what they call it, right? The only thing that kept him from clicking on it that 4th time is it was Friday at 5 o'clock. And on Monday at 8:33, he clicked on it for his 4th time and became disassociated from the Department of Defense because they won't keep you at that point. You've proven that you don't really belong here. So you need to move on with your career. There's probably a wide world for you in pen testing out there, and now that you know how to, help a hacker get in, go ahead, do it. So this young man back here?
Yeah,
John,
yes, well, I was wondering if this here is compromised with the firmware. What are the symptoms? I mean, what can the average person do?
So, there's a number of different behaviors that go with malware. Firmware specifically can materialize from slowness downright to not much at all. In fact, what we find is that hackers aren't really trying to hold you up as much as they're trying to help themselves out. They want your data, right? So doing things like back in the old days, there was one that came along and it would open the CD tray and it would do all kind of little weird behaviors, and those are just annoying, right? Those are simply annoying. They draw attention to the attacker, right? And so somebody finally figures it out and they re-image that system and it doesn't open the CD tray for the cup holder. Here's your cup holder, in the AOL voice, here's your cup holder. It doesn't do that because that would draw attention. They want to silently exfiltrate your data off of your network. They want to listen for your credits that are on your network. Anybody here have pass the hash? Right? What are we doing about pass the hash in 2018?
I'm changing the password for my administrators every night. Yeah.
Every night. So I have customers that go one step farther than that. They force the administrator to check out an administrative cred, and then 30 minutes later,
We're doing that next.
yeah, it expires. And the administrators hate that. They hate that because it means that they're not able to just bounce in there and do the job they were supposed to have done. They have to tie their requisition to a ticket number and be able to say, this is what I was in there for, this is the change that I'm making, and then they revert their cred set, and that goes away. Even still, when I look at data from customers, I go, so you publish global catalog, huh? Oh yeah. And we just put one in so-and-so, Singapore, wherever, right? I said, did you ever think about actually using, encryption? Maybe like global catalog encrypt, Well, yeah, but, there's too much overhead in that. And I'm like, so you mean you're going to leave your global catalog open so I can enumerate that? Can't. Yeah. And I'm not talking about Dunkin' Donuts here. I'm talking about insurance companies, military industrial complex still does it in some occasions. They have associative child companies that make, let's say, golf carts or something along those. I don't know why they called that company. It was dumb. But the point being, they bought these little child companies, and those child companies never had those constraints. So they won't do all that. It's hard to support and all this other business. So they don't bother to defend their network. So they easily have that. So the honest truth is, today, as little trouble as possible is what they want to bring to the surface. You're going to see volumes of data. It's going to come from your SIEMs report. You're going to see, oh, this workstation sent some big blow-in amount of bandwidth out the front door at like 2 in the morning. And it did it for an hour. I had a customer, was that
Clue number one.
Clue number one. I had a customer sat down with him and I said, listen, tell me about your trouble, tell me what's going on, how's things going, blah, blah, blah. And he said, there is one. About 3 months ago, this started. And at this period of time, 2 in the morning, we have like this ungodly amount of traffic that flows out the front door, and it's gotten worse. Now it comes off all these boxes, and it's moved to these servers now. And I said, your clue was back here, right? So this is behavior, right? And he said, look, these boxes aren't restarting, they're not slow, and I was like, they're not ever going to be slow. If I'm an attacker, I want your data without you knowing. And the only thing you're going to see is that. The funny thing about firmware, I'll tell you this one, is they have a way that they set up a timing routine and they blip out a few extra bytes on every packet in the pad. And you'll never see it because you're not looking in the pad. You don't care about the pad. And it's not a virus. It's just your data going out. They reassemble it later. So they put down little bitty trickles of information that go out. So it's not about the behavior. Now it's about what does the telemetry say on the SIEM system? What does the telemetry say from my NOC? Are there coinciding events? Why did Kevin, not if your name's Kevin here, it's not, I'm not calling you out, but why did Kevin in my SOC not respond to the box that restarts, right? or a BIMS, somebody should go look at that, right? It's not just antivirus now. And it's not just hardening workstations and servers and putting up great firewalls. It's a comprehensive picture. So you really have to think about what it isn't more about than what it really is. There's better data in your SIEMs information, particularly with networks, that kind of stuff. It's answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, is it a good idea to keep your firmware updated, to do the updated firmware? Is it likely to be more fortified in this day and age?
It's not that they're adding any new fortifications, but they're closing the old holes. Just like the Lenovo firmware issue, the ENOS issue that was 14 years old. They put out a firmware update. Oh, by the way, for 14 years we've had this hole.
But nobody knows.
But nobody noticed. And now we're fixing it, right? Because somebody finally got wind of what's going on. They start looking at this trickle-based data. They look at these big blasts that happen in the middle of the night. They start looking at these servers that are restarting for no apparent reason whatsoever. And they figure out that, this is what's going on. This is where having a good incident response program and a good incident response team. One of the reasons, Nate was talking about great careers in cybersecurity, right? You get paid to know things, being able to take the data, analyze the information, and turn it into an actionable response. And incident response is it's as close to Tom Clancy work as you're ever going to get, unless you'd like to go out and become, spy versus spy. I don't want that for myself. So, so being able to help somebody with IR is as close as I'm going to get. Is that what Nate's not doing?
Well, I say, kind of builds on, piggybacks off your last question, Sandeep. When working we were putting out a firewall product, right? Our marketing folks, they wanted to, hey, we want a stamp approval. We can say this is HIPAA compliant, this remains Oxley, PCI, and all this. And then when we looked a little further into those compliance measurements, we see touted across the industry of all these other competitors who are saying they're compliant on all these measurements. But then I read into it more and more of it was based on the actual storage of the data, the traversing of networks of data.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's a lot of confusion with all of these different compliance measurements of when somebody's compliant, when they are. When I've been on calls with customers and experts, it just seems like there's more confusion in the overhead than there necessarily is compliance.
Right. So compliance is not the place where I typically dwell. I'm more of a true CS kind of guy. I look at it in this fashion. I think about data in flight, right? Data that's on the wire, it's moving from one system to another system. I think about data at rest. It's stored on your hard drive. It's in a quote-unquote static state. And then there's data in use. So who's an Azure person here? Anybody an Azure expert? Surely at Microsoft there's an Azure person. Okay, so we all, Azure has a very interesting feature that's coming out for data in use. And so they have sandboxing built around that memory segment to defend it, so that data in use, I pull up a Word document, it's supposedly being modified, that data is being defended, which is typically the weakest link. That used to be the argument you got from everybody when you said, well, you got to do data in flight, data at rest, and then they say, well, what about data in use? So there's nothing that defends it while you're using it. So Azure does have that sandbox capability. I like for compliance, and you're looking at regulations, to look at it from those states. Right? And there's obviously data creation or obtaining the data. I'm going to put my GDPR hat on. Obtaining that data or creating that data, and then there's disposal of that data as well. So there's a number of different things. When we talk about firewalls, you're looking at data in flight and data at rest. Predominantly data at rest is the credential set that you plug into that firewall thing, right, so that it can authenticate to Active Directory, right? So you want to defend that piece. So I try to compartmentalize it to break it up, because when you're right, when they come out, okay, SAR box, PCI DSS, LMNOP, you know, and they throw a can of vegetable soup at you, and you're like, it becomes so confusing, it's hard to deal with at that point. If you break it up into the states and then apply each one, you can start managing it, checking it off and saying it does or does not meet these. I'll tell you, when you look at 853, and I think you'll probably agree with me, it's volumes. It is huge. And being able to go through the whole thing and know it all by heart is it's not impossible, but I would say you're probably wise to focus on an area and then let somebody else focus on another area. I like to look at the NIST CSF. That's one that has a lot more closer applicability to being able to say, okay, I can remember a larger majority of it because it's more succinct. But it's also set up more like a maturity assessment than it is regulation and compliance with a given set of standards. So that's, you know, dividing the hair, if you will, cutting the hair, but you know, a lot more doable from that perspective. Does that answer your question? Anybody else?
I had a question about products.
Alan wins for frequent question.
Frequent question, thank you.
Right.
As products, one of the issues in a large enterprise is coverage of whatever it is, right? So if you're agent-based or agent-less, right, you have turnover of machines, especially when you get to a workstation level. Even in a large enterprise, servers come and go. How do you, so it's, first of all, it's trapezoid agent-based?
Agent-less.
So it's agent-based, right? So, but you still have to, how do you tie that into the normal, in a large environment, to the normal turnover of this machine is coming off the network, this machine is being rebooted? How, you see where I'm going?
Well, I mean,
And I'm talking about, you know, when you have 500,000 machines.
Absolutely.
If you have a slippage of 5%.
that's a significant jump.
Yeah, all of a sudden it's a lot of machines,
Yeah.
even though it may be terrific, right? That's, you're at 95%.
That 95% is not the bar, 100% is the bar, right? Your idle processes to be able to operate your organization should come to bear as far as how do I onboard new resources, what is my provisioning, what is the common server build, what is my hardened server build, what is my accounting build. You know, one of the things when we talk about security from the overall piece too, I'll tell you this, user turnover is by far higher than machine turnover, for the most part. Now, I have seen people put systems in and they're gone 6 months later, but that's usually one of those deals where the vice president that just got hired from Delmonico or wherever comes in and says, oh yeah, I love this new whatever it is. The company buys it, they put it in, he gets canned, it's gone, right? But that's like 1, 2, 3 systems. People come and go every day. And when you're looking at IAM, that's probably your higher turnover piece. Having that idle process, ITIL, idle process, to be able to define what does onboarding look like? How do you do role-based access control, right? How many of you in your organization today assign a role to people in accounting? How many of you assign a role to people in sales? How many of you assign a role to people in IT? How many of you have sub-roles inside of IT? Those role-based pieces are very important. What you might not have are the classifications of data that go with them, right? So this data may be good for public, it may be private, confidential, company, corporate owned, you know, in a certain group of people. And that would be defined as maybe top line execs, you know, or marketing, that kind of thing. Then corporate research and development. Who's going to have access to that? Certainly not the sales weasels who are out trying to get rid of this stuff. I love people in sales. They make my life work, so don't get me wrong. But, you know, they call me a geeky tech head, right? Oh, well, geeky tech heads. Let's get my sale. You know, you're holding my sale. So, you know, but the point is, the R&D data that's classified that way, doesn't get handed to the guy in sales, because he'll go out and try and sell on that, right? He will sell on that data that is proprietary and not supposed to be public knowledge. It's not marketing. Don't let marketing people sit with your salespeople to some degree, but don't let them ever sit with your people in R&D, right? Because they get talking. And they start talking about, did you see this new project that we're doing down there? And then it's natural. We're at lunch. You want to, everybody's got to top the next story, right? So yeah, I shot a tiger. The guy says, I shot an elephant. The third guy says, I went to the moon and killed a tiger and an elephant, right? And you're like, what? Yeah, it's coming. I'm telling you, Elon Musk just put a car in space, headed to Mars, right? I mean, think about if you knew that, that's data that would be worth banking, right? So you have to look at the role-based access control. You have to look at the classification of your data that you let them see. And the last one that I'm starting to see is attribute-based access control. You're a multinational company. You do work in the United States and you do work in Canada. But you employ people from India, Pakistan, Russia, Israel, the United States clearly, Canada. You have a program for a vertical flight device that is manufactured here in the United States, and you sell to the Department of Defense. Can you have a Canadian engineer look at your DoD-based specifications? Ron, it's right. You cannot let a Canadian engineer, a Canadian national, look at your DoD-based project. And likewise, you think we're, as they say, anal? Canadians won't even let me go in their facility because I have a U.S. passport, right? And so attribute my U.S. citizenship applied to my access in IAM is a way that I take care of that. So yes, your IO processes should take care of onboarding, life cycle, through use, and then offboarding.
But, there's always a gap between the theory.
I mean, in theory, I'm an idle shop, right?
But there's,
There's slippage where the tire meets the road.
Engineers make plans, machinists implement them. And when they're on the floor, the shop floor, grinding this thing out of a chunk of steel, he'll say, they'll never know about that 10,000ths of an inch that I didn't shave off or did shave off. It'll look the same when they paint it. Because machinist knows I have that much tolerance in there. You have to figure out where your gap is, do a gap analysis, find out how bad is that problem. Is it significant enough that I should be focusing on that? And if it is, then dedicate somebody to it. Likewise, when you have an issue, right? So you have a breach. How many of you have a formally defined IR process when you have a breach? Right? So at the end, what's the last thing you do on breach? What's the last thing, Ron, what's the last thing you guys do on breach? After you took care of the problem, what's the last thing you did? Before you close the books, turn off the lights and go home and wait for the next day? Assess. You assess the issue, you figure out how it happened, you document that, you go and look at your policies, processes, and procedures, and then you update them so that those are current and take care of that particular exploit that occurred, right? That's part of that continuous life cycle of information. Did I see a hand in the back? I do that too. So yeah, that's how you do it. Continuous improvement is part of it. You have to remember, computers are made by men. Men are frail. They have human iniquities, sins available to them. Therefore, all computers have sins and iniquities. That's just part of it, right? When you add some people to the mix, it gets even worse, right? I mean, it's just what it is. Not everybody wakes up in the morning and thinks critically about what am I about to do and goes about it in a methodical fashion. Most of them are thinking about it's 2 hours and 9 minutes to lunch. The guy that was in Hawaii and put out the missile alert, he swears to God he heard that there was a missile alert, right? I have no clue whether that's true or not, I think the guy was probably just, you know, having those psychotic events kind of thing. And that might be part of your policies and procedures, is for people that are imagining voices, that maybe they get some different deals.
Keep them away from the big button.
Keep them away from the big button, right? You know, there's a principle in security called the two-man rule. Have you ever heard of the two-man rule?
Yeah.
Right? So we have that in missile silos, we have it on nuclear submarines. You know, we use it to prevent a single person from making a decision which might kill us all. And I mean, and you know, so that's an aspect, right, that comes into play for something like this Hawaii missile system thing, you know, or Hawaii missile response system thing. Is he can click the button, but then that goes to another person in a workflow, and they have to then agree, and then the message is prepared and sent out. Do we have that long? The other guy might have already gone to lunch because, you know, he saw the machine reboot and decides, hey, it's lunchtime, you know. The answer is, it's all built with humans. So it has frailties, you do the best you can to keep things from happening. But two-man rule is one of those rules that we can use to help keep somebody from doing dumb things, right? Any more questions? Anybody else? Well, Nate, I'll turn it back over to you. Y'all been a great audience. Thanks so much for having me.